Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. This is our second class in this Masechet, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 4 through 10. And we've been discussing the different beginnings of the year, the different Rosh Hashanah, and we left off last week talking about Nissan and how it was counted as the beginning of the reign of the Jewish kings. However, Tishrei is the beginning of non-Jewish kings. And we ended last week talking about Koresh, Cyrus, and the Gemara said that he was a good king, but then he became bad. And the Gemara says, really, but we know that he gave money for the building of the temple. And the Gemara says, well, really, when he gave the money, he was doing it for selfish reasons, and that's why they call him evil or wicked. However, some say that that's not the reason, really, that instead of building a beautiful gold or marble temple, he built it with wood. So on one hand, he was building the temple. On the other hand, he was doing it with maybe substandard building material. Another option takes it a little bit more to an extreme and says that he actually had a dog who he had a very special relationship with. It sat next to him where the queen should have sat, and actually he had relations with it, and really he was this evil king. From here, the Gemara continues talking about how else Nissan, again, being in the spring, when else is it considered the beginning of the year? So the Gemara says that it's the beginning of the year for the festivals, for the regalim. And it says that the holiday in Nisan, right, is the Rosh Hashanah, meaning again the beginning of the cycle of the festivals. The question is, what is the practical application to that? And the Gemara explains for the issue of what's called Bal Ta'acher. Bal Ta'acher is a commandment; it's a mitzvah. That means that you cannot delay in bringing your sacrifices to the temple. And the Gemara explains that you basically have 3 holidays in a row in order to bring your sacrifices that you promised to bring. And the question is, there's actually a disagreement. What does this mean, 3 holidays? So again, Nisan being the Rosh Hashanah for the holidays, and we want to make sure that you have 3 holidays with which to give your sacrifices that you need to bring. There's a difference of opinion if that means whatever holiday you made a vow or you said you were going to bring a sacrifice, is it 3 after that? Meaning, if you made a vow in the middle of the summer, you would count Sukkot, Pesach, and then Shavuot. Or one opinion is no, you always start from Pesach, meaning Bal Ta'acher, meaning not to delay, only goes in the order of Pesach, Shavuot, and and Sukkot. The Gemara says again on Daf 4 that there's a verse that says that you need to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. And those 3 times a year, again, as we said, are Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And the Gemara says maybe it needs to be in that order. Or no, you have till Sukkot. Whenever you made a vow, you have till Sukkot to bring your sacrifice. Or whenever you go to the temple, you can bring your sacrifices. And therefore, as we know, there's a commandment to go every festival. So whenever you make a vow, the next festival that comes, that is the time that you need to bring your sacrifice. Or another opinion is you get 2 holidays. So again, we're discussing what does it mean to not delay to bring your sacrifice. And the options are you have one festival, you have two, you have three, maybe you have any three, or you might have three only starting from Pesach. Um, so the Gemara says that another thing that we learn from this verse, again, the verse connects all three of the festivals. So the Gemara says that the verse also teaches that you can make up if you didn't bring your sacrifice for the festival, you have all 7 days to bring the sacrifice. We know that Pesach is 7 days, Sukkot is 7 days, but interestingly enough, the Gemara says that even for Shavuot, which we know is only one day, or in Chutz La'aretz it's 2 days, you have, says the Gemara, you have 7 days to bring your sacrifice of Shavuot that whole week. That is because the verse linked Shavuot to the other two festivals. Just like the other two festivals are 7 or 8 days, as Sukkot is, so to Shavuot, you have 7 days to bring your sacrifice, and it's not only the one day that you that we know that you can bring the sacrifice. Again, we're at the bottom of Daf 4. For those of you who are joining late, sorry for the technical difficulties. We did start a little bit later, so you didn't miss too much. We're discussing how Nissan is the beginning of the year for the festivals, that we start counting the festivals from Pesach. So Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And we just said that you can, if you forget or you couldn't bring the sacrifice on Shavuot itself, you have 7 days with which to bring the holiday's sacrifice. On Daf 5, the Gemara says that we learn another thing from this verse. Again, there's a verse that says that that links all three of the holidays. So the Gemara on Daf 5 tells us that it links all three of the holidays to tell us that Sukkot is compared to Pesach, that you need to stay overnight in Jerusalem on the second night. We know that on Pesach, on Passover, on the night of Passover, you sleep over in Jerusalem. You bring the next sacrifice on that day, the Korban Chagigah of the festival, the holiday festival sacrifice, and then you sleep over another night, and then you leave Jerusalem. The same thing goes for Sukkot as well, that you need to stay at least overnight to fulfill bringing the sacrifice as well. The idea is you can't just bring your sacrifice and go right home. You need to stay in Jerusalem at least overnight. The Gemara continues and tells us that they learn that you have a week to bring, as we mentioned before, that you can bring the sacrifice of Shavuot for a week. And based on, again, on this verse, comparing Shavuot to Sukkot and to Pesach. The Gemara says that the Korban Pesach, again, the sacrifice that was brought on Pesach, must be brought on Erev Pesach. We learned this in Masechet Pesachim. So then how then is there this concept of you can bring it after the festival? We know you can't bring the Korban Pesach after the festival. You need to bring it exactly on the festival. So the Gemara explains that if you lost the animal and then you brought a different animal and you used that as your Passover sacrifice, and then you found the original animal, again, you have 3 festivals with which to bring this animal. Just to remind us, we've discussed that an animal retains its sanctity. So this animal, even though it was lost and you already fulfilled your obligation of Korban Pesach, you still need to bring the original animal as a sacrifice because it still retains its sanctity. The Gemara then brings the actual verse of Bal Ta'acher. As I mentioned previously, Bal Ta'acher means that you cannot delay in bringing sacrifices to the temple. And the Gemara basically goes through every word in the verse and explains what each word is teaching us. So it says, when you make a vow, a neder, or a nedava. So these are two types of vows. The distinction is when you take a neder, like from the word from the kol nidre, from the prayer that we said on Yom Kippur. And when you take a neder, usually the language is hare alai. I take upon myself to bring a fill in the blank, right? A Thanksgiving sacrifice, to bring a olah sacrifice, whatever it is, you take it upon yourself. Hare alai. A nedava is where you say hare zu, meaning I take it. No, sorry. My vow is that this animal is going to be a sacrifice. What's the distinction? If I say this animal is going to be the sacrifice, if that animal gets lost or dies, I now do not have a responsibility because the whole responsibility was about that animal. If I say I take it upon myself to bring a sacrifice, if the animal that I intended to bring dies, I still need to bring another animal. So that would be the distinction between neder and nedava. Both of them is the word means vow, but there's that halachic distinction. It says lehashem, to God. That means all. These are things that are for God and not necessarily for priests. Again, it says don't be late in bringing it, right? In bringing it, but and not a different one, right? You need to bring that animal that you said you were going to bring. It's for all sacrifices. It's even this a concept of not delaying also includes giving charity or giving tithes, right? Maaser. So it's not only for sacrifices. And I think really it's a beautiful concept of you are responsible for doing what you say you're going to do. And the Torah says you can't put it off forever, right? You have a time limit where you need to give these gifts. Right? This also pertains to what's called leket or shichacha, the agricultural mitzvot, commandments that have to do with your land. When you give to the poor people, you leave the corners, or if something drops, you leave it for the poor people. This also, if you need to give it to the poor people, you must give it again within this year. And again, you need to bring it within this year of 3 festivals. Okay, so the question is again, what is this a substitute for? Right? It can't be like what are we talking about when we talk about having to bring it? It also includes a korban todah, a thanksgiving offering. Let's say if it was lost and then it was found, so you need to bring that. And the other option is maybe we're talking about a sacrifice that you transferred the sanctity from another animal. That too, that animal must be given within those 3 festivals. And from here, the Gemara at the bottom of 5 discusses the Bechor, the firstborn, and how it's like Maaser, like the tithes, and it doesn't become pasul, like nullified, if the year passed. Again, if you missed that year, you still can bring it. You did transgress in the sense that you didn't bring it in the right time. However, you still, I guess, you still should bring this sacrifice when it needs to be brought. The Gemara at the top of 6 asks, well, maybe if I missed that year, maybe it can't be used for atonement. The Gemara says, no. It still gives you atonement, even if you passed, right? Even if the time has expired, it still can bring you atonement. Okay. The next verse that the Gemara brings talks about keeping vows. Again, we're talking about the sanctity of words. when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. So the Gemara says that this is a positive commandment and a negative commandment, meaning you must keep it, and if you don't keep it, there are also a punishment. So in a sense, it's a positive and a negative commandment, and the court can force you to keep it. And again, as we mentioned, this has to do with vows, it has to do with sacrifices and charity. As we said, the Gemara explains that you can force the court, the Beit Din, can force someone to fulfill a vow that one takes. And the Gemara talks about, right, kofin oto ad sheyagid rotze ani. Right, what does that mean? They force the person or coerce the person till he says yes, 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 okay, okay, I'll do it. In the sense that again, we're not promoting violence, but we know that deep down people want to fulfill what they said that they were going to fulfill, and sometimes they need a little help remembering what they wanted to do. Okay, the Gemara says that you need a verse to teach that if you say you will do it, but again, here we're making a distinction. There are different steps to a vow, right? One is saying you're going to do it. The next is designating the animal. So the Gemara says that we need a verse to teach that if you said you were going to do it, but you didn't designate the animal, you're still liable to bring it within that year. And we also need a verse to teach that if you designated it, but you didn't sacrifice it yet, I also need a verse to teach you that you need to bring it, right? Again, both are teaching that our words have power, and we need to fulfill what we say, we say we're going to do. Again, as I mentioned, here the Gemara on 6 talks about neder and nedava. Neder being, I will do it, and if it dies, you are responsible to bring another animal. And nedava is, this animal will be a sacrifice. If it dies, you are not responsible to bring another animal. The Gemara says, however, you can construct a case where you say, I will do it, but you're stipulating that I'm not responsible if the animal dies. So interestingly, with, again, the power of words, you can take a neder and turn it into a nedava, which is, I think, very interesting. The Gemara talks about tzedakah, right, charity, and how you need to give it right away. I guess I misspoke before. You do not have a year to give charity. Rather, you must give it right away. The Gemara says why? Again, because charity goes to poor people. They can't wait a year for you to get around giving them what they need. And therefore, the Gemara says charity must be given right away. Sacrifices, again, God can wait a little bit. So obviously, the quicker you can do it, the better. But you do have a longer amount of time to do it. Here the Gemara asks, and I've used it interchangeably, and the Gemara is calling me out on it, right? Do you have a year or do you have 3 festivals? Because it's not the same thing, right? Because you can have a year where you don't have 3 festivals, or, right, again, if there's a leap year, as we will see this year, right, it adds an extra month. So it's not, you can have a whole year in terms of the number of days or the number of months, right, 12 months, but it's still not a full year. And therefore the question is, which one is it? And from here, the Gemara talks, because we have leap years, the dates of every festival can change every year, right? The Gemara says that Shavuot can either be on the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th of Sivan, depending on the length of the 2 months previous, again, Nissan or Iyar. Again, remember Shavuot, as opposed to all the other festivals, the date is not given in the Torah. It says you have to count 49 days, and then it's Shavuot, right, on the 50th day. So depending on how long the month of Nissan and Iyar are, will determine the day that Shavuot is celebrated. If this is confusing, you're correct, because nowadays That is not the case. Nowadays, our calendars are fixed. We're not, soon we're going to talk about declaring when it's Rosh Chodesh. When we look up at the moon, that is not the case nowadays. Nowadays, we have a fixed calendar, and Shavuot will always be on Vav Sivan. But in the time of the Gemara, they were waiting to see when the moon would appear, when the new moon would appear, and therefore there was some flexibility as to what day or the date of Shavuot in the time of the Gemara. The Gemara says that an inheritor needs to bring his father's sacrifices that he vowed to bring. And the question is he, again, limited to that time period that we said before? The Gemara says no. The person who makes the vow has the time limit. However, the inheritor does not have the time limit, and the inheritor can bring it when they can. What about a woman? Right? We know that in general, time commandments that have to do with time maybe do not affect women. Right? Does she have this issue of not delaying? The Gemara says she doesn't have to do it. Right? A woman is not obligated in Aliyah Laregel to go up to Jerusalem for the festival. So maybe she does not have to bring it within those 3 festivals. But again, a woman is obligated in Simcha to rejoice in the festival, which usually means going to Jerusalem and eating from the sacrifice. So the Gemara says, no, her husband can make her happy, right? Simcha, the joy of a festival, we normally associate it in the Gemara with eating meat and wine, drinking wine. The Gemara says, no, it could also be that the husband buys his wife clothing. That's what makes her happy, and therefore maybe she is not. Therefore, she is not necessarily. There's no resolution here if she is obligated in Baal Tacher, in this idea of not delaying. Again, we talked about Nissan being the time when we count the year for a Bechor, Bechor being the firstborn of the animals. So the question is, do you count it from when it's born, or, you have a year to give it. Sorry, it's not Nissan. You have a year to give this animal. The question is, do we count a year from when it's born, or from when you can sacrifices, which is the 8th day, right? The first 7 days of an animal's life, you may not sacrifice it. You can only bring it as a sacrifice on the 8th day. The Gemara says that on Daf 7 now, the Gemara says that for an unblemished animal, you count from the 8th day, because again, it is going to be a sacrifice. So you count a year from when it was able to be sacrificed. But if it's a blemished animal, which will not be a sacrifice, you count the year from when it was born. Okay, Aleph Nissan, the Gemara says, is also the Rosh Hashanah for the months. What does that mean? We'll see in a minute. It says it's also the Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, for calculating a leap year, and for shkalim, for separating the new shkalim. Those of you who learned Masechet Shkalim, you'll remember that the shkalim were collected in Adar, and the next month, Nissan, was when they started using the new coins, the new shkalim that were separated. The last thing is for Nissan is also for renting houses. That signifies a year. So the Gemara explains each one of these things. What does it mean? It's the new year for months. It says, again, or how do we know, right? It says in the Torah, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, right? When God talked about Rosh Chodesh, he was actually talking about the month of Nisan. It's when God talked to the Jewish people when they were still in Egypt. So he said that the new month, right, is going to be Nisan, and therefore, and also needs to be the month of ripening. It's the spring, the first ripening, and therefore it is Nisan. Maybe it's from another verse. Maybe the new year of the new year of the months is from Tishrei. The Gemara says, no, no, no. Again, Nissan is the first month of the year when we're counting in months, and there are many verses that prove this. What does it mean that Nissan is the beginning for leap years? The Gemara explains that the court sits to decide if it's going to be a leap year before Adar. So what are we talking about in Nissan? The Gemara says that once Aleph Nissan comes, you cannot make that year a leap year. You can only make it a leap year in Adar, and that's when you decide if it's going to be a leap year or not. Again, shkalim, as we mentioned before, it's when they collect the new year's shekel, and that is when it started being used. Again, renting a house. Let's say someone says, "I will rent you a house for a year." The question is, what does that mean? So generally, a year is 12 months. But if you say, "I'm going to rent you my house for this year," this year ends at Aleph Nisan, right? Because we're going by months generally, and therefore it's going to count from Aleph Nisan. And now the Gemara moves on to Aleph Elul. Again, Elul being usually around August, say August time, the month before Tishrei. This is a good masechet to learn the months of the year and their order. So Elul comes right before Rosh Hashanah, before Tishrei. The Gemara says that Maaser Behima, when we separate every 10th animal, how do we decide what that year's animals are? It goes by Aleph Elul. And the Gemara says that everyone really agrees that there are 4 new years, as we mentioned last time, and some add other beginnings of the year, or maybe there are 4 months that have Rosh Hashanah in them, but there's more than 4 beginnings of the year. Okay, so now let's talk about Rosh Hashanah, right? How it starts the night before, Okay, and the question is, right, it doesn't have to do with an action, right? Meaning as soon as it becomes that date, then it becomes the new year. The Gemara on Daf 8 tells us that there's a verse that talks about Maaser Behema. Oh, wait, I think there was a slide I wanted to show you. Here's a slide about Aleph Nisan, just as a review, again, for Chodashim, for counting the months, for Iburin, which means a leap year, for the Shkalim, again, for when you were donating the Shkalim for the new sacrifices, and some say, again, as I mentioned, for renting a house as well. So that's just an overview for Nisan. Okay, from here, the Gemara talks about whether again, the animals, we mentioned taking a tithe from the animals. Does it happen in Elul or the next month in Tishrei? And the Gemara tries to understand, again, what is the process. So it says that the sheep become pregnant when the crops sprout, which is in Adar, which is around, right, which is Purim time, around February or March. And then they give birth in Av, which is, again, around July, August. And therefore, the beginning of the new year would be Elul, right? Meaning if they're all giving birth by Av, the next month is Elul. Or, says the Gemara, maybe they get pregnant when the crops are fully ripened, which is Nisan, which is like March, April, and then they give birth in Elul around, again, August, I would say, and therefore, if they give birth in Elul, the Rosh Hashanah would be, the beginning of the year would be Tishrei, right? We'd want the Rosh Hashanah after the animals all give birth, and then that kind of closes up the year. So the Gemara says, no, that we compare animals and grain, and therefore all of it, right after it's harvested, you take Maaser, which is in Tishrei. so too for animals. When everything is born, after all the animals are born, then you take maaser, the tithes, which would mean again Elul. Or no, we compare it differently and we say just like grain is taken or the year is counted from Tishrei, so too the animal tithe starts from Tishrei. So again, we have difference of opinion if the tithing of the animal, the new year starts in Elul or in Tishrei. Okay, the Gemara continues with Tishrei and tells us that for years, again, the new year, as we're all familiar, starts in Tishrei. Why is this important? Again, for documents. I want to be able to date the document with the proper date. And therefore, we have to know when the new year is. Also, Tishrei is the new year for the non-Jewish kings, as we mentioned before. Maybe the year means we're talking about seasons. And that's when we talk about like the beginning. Again, the beginning of the year is in Tishrei, and we'll see this next week. It's actually, I think, tomorrow's daf, talking about when the world was created. Right, Tishrei celebrates the creation of the world, and therefore it is the new year for the year. Or as we famously it is known that that Rosh Hashanah, meaning Tishrei, is the time when the whole world is judged. Right? We mentioned this in our prayers on Rosh Hashanah. So this is the source, and we are going to talk more about this as we learn this Masechet. So the Gemara says that we learn the verse that when the moon is covered, right, which is on the first of the month, that's when the moon is the most covered. That's when the world is judged, when God judges the world. It also is when the Beit Din establishes the month. That's when God can judge and here the Gemara talks about God sitting in judgment. And he says that the Gemara says that the Jews are judged first, and then the rest of the world is judged. Why? So the Gemara says it's like a king, right? The king is also judged before the nation, either because you don't want to keep the king waiting. So too the Jewish people, they get judged first. You don't want to keep the Jews waiting. Or we want a favorable verdict, and therefore we want to get in to see the judge as early as possible. If you wait till the end of the day, then maybe the judgment will be less favorable. I think we have a judge who listens to our shir, so maybe she can weigh in, but just putting it out there. Okay, next idea is Shemitah. Shemitah, as we all know, starts Aleph Tishrei. Again, when the year begins, so too Shemitah begins. And if we're talking about Shemitah, so too Yovel. Yovel, the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year after 7 Shemitah cycles. Then that year as well begins in Tishrei. So what happens in that year? The Jewish slaves are freed. And interestingly, they blow the shofar in the Yovel year on Yom Kippur. So here the Gemara wants to know, does that mean that it begins on Yom Kippur, meaning on the 10th of Tishrei? Or no, it really begins on Aleph Tishrei, on the 1st of Tishrei, and then there are 10 days of kind of semi-freedom, and then the slaves are released. Again, Yovel is the freeing of the slaves. They are freed only after the 10th of Tishrei. So it's kind of like this limbo. Also, then at the end, it ends maybe Yom Kippur of the next year, and not in Elul. Gemara says no. It ends at Rosh Hashanah at the end of the year. That is when it ends. Interestingly, here at the bottom of Daf 8, the Gemara talks about a concept called Tosefet Kodesh, which means we add to sanctity. And therefore, and we'll see in a minute, in Shemitah, the Gemara is going to explain that we add a little bit. It's not exactly from the first of Tishrei till the end of Elul, being exactly 1 year, but we want there to be more kodesh, more sanctity or holiness, and therefore we add more to either end. And here at the top of Daf 9, it explains this concept of Tosefet Kodesh, that we have a verse that teaches about Shemitah that says that you have to actually stop plowing a little bit before the Shemitah year starts. And when you harvest after the Shemitah year, some things still have sanctity. So we see that there's kind of a bleeding in both directions. The Gemara says we also learned this with Yom Kippur. Those of you who learned Masechet Yuma, we also mentioned this as well. The idea that there's a verse that says that you fast on the 9th and the 10th. Now, we know that we don't fast on the 9th, meaning Yom Kippur we know is only on the 10th. So what does it mean that we afflict our souls on the 9th? The Gemara says we add a little bit from the 9th and start fasting a little bit earlier, right? Yom Kippur is not 24 hours, rather it's 25 hours. We add a little bit of our time and fast even a little bit on the 9th of Tishrei as well. Rabbi Akiva from this verse also learns that when we eat on the 9th, it's as if, right, we get credit for fasting on the 10th, meaning just like fasting on the 10th of Tishrei on Yom Kippur is a mitzvah, so too eating on the 9th in preparation for Yom Kippur is also a mitzvah, and you get credit as well. The Gemara then says that any time the Torah talks about resting on a certain day, right? Shabbat, the festival, Shemitah, all of these ideas, we add a little bit from our mundane to, we add sanctity, we add kodesh to our chol. That's why there's a concept of Tosefet Shabbat. Actually, here in Alon Shvut, in the neighborhood, they actually add 5 minutes to Shabbat because we want to add a little bit more sanctity to our I guess weekday. So we take a little bit from our Friday and make it Shabbat as well. From here, the Gemara talks about the 3 verses that speak about Yovel, again, the Jubilee year. The first verse talks about blowing the shofar for the Yovel year. The second is it talks about proclaiming freedom, which really means that the slaves will be freed. And the third verse talks about not working the land, right? So those are 3 aspects of the Yovel year. And the Gemara says that it's only considered the Jubilee year, the Yovel, if the slaves are freed. If you don't free your slaves, it's not considered Yovel. Or a second opinion is it's only considered Yovel if you blow the shofar on that Yom Kippur. And if not, it's not considered Yovel. Again, the verse seems to say that one of these 3 things must be done in order for it to be Yovel. And here we have a difference of opinion which one it is. The sages, however, say, no, you need all 3 of these aspects to make it a Yovel year. And interestingly enough, the Yovel year is relevant in the whole world. When it is relevant in Israel, it's relevant in the whole world, meaning that when you free your slaves in Israel, you must also free your slaves outside of Israel, as opposed to Shemitah, which is only in Israel. Okay, from here, the Gemara is going to talk about trees. And we said that for Orla is that the first 3 years of a fruit tree's life, you may not eat the fruit. So the question is, when do we count the age of the tree? And the Gemara says we count it from Tishrei, from Aleph Tishrei. And even if it was planted in Elul, then Tishrei, but when it comes to Tishrei, the next month, it's counted as if it's a year old already. And the Gemara says that if you plant your tree, or if you, I don't know the English word for this, it's not grafting, but it's where you take a branch from a tree, you plant that branch in the ground, and then you wait for it to take root, and then you cut it off of its original tree, and now you have a new tree that's growing from this new planted area. So that is also, we'll see one second. So if you plant, or if you do this, or if you graft, here there's a nice picture of a graft. Graft means, right, you cut off a branch and then you attach it to a tree. All these things are types of planting. Again, whether you're planting it in the tree or in the ground. And if you do this at least 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, meaning before Tishrei, even again 30 days before Tishrei being before Elul, then it counts as a year old when you get to Rosh Hashanah, right? Again, even though you only did it for 30 days, it's as if when you get to Rosh Hashanah, it's a new year, and the tree is already considered a year old. But if you did it within 30 days of Rosh Hashanah, it does not count. And from here, the Gemara says on Daf 10 that the fruit, however, can only be eaten after Tu B'Shvat. Again, next week we'll have to talk more about Tu B'Shvat versus Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei. What's the difference? And here the Gemara talks about it depends when you planted your tree. Again, let's say your tree was 24 months old plus a day. Maybe that is considered 3 years old already, and then the isur, the prohibition of orla, doesn't apply. Or maybe you need 24 months plus a month, right? The question is, and we actually learned this last week, that if, remember we talked about the king, if he was the king at least a day before Nissan, it's as if when he gets to Nissan, it's as if he was already king for a year. Here, it seems to be a month. So the question is there a difference? Is there a difference? Again, we talked about a day being a year, as opposed to here with trees, it seems to be saying a month is a year, but a day is not a year. And the Gemara says maybe it's really technical that a graft takes a certain number of days to take root, and therefore, right, maybe it takes 3 days to take root, maybe it takes 2 weeks, maybe you need to do it 30 days plus 3 days, and the question is, maybe it takes 30 days to take root, and that's why we're talking about a month being considered a year, but not a day. And interestingly enough, on Daf 10, the Gemara brings a proof from Noach, right? Noach leaves the ark, and the verse talks about how old Noach is and how long he was in the ark, and it says it's the first day of the year, and it's called already a year. So the Gemara says, oh, well, if the day is called a year, it must mean that a day can equal a year. Or the Gemara says, no. It also says 1 day equals a month. And therefore, maybe it's the month that is considered a year for plants, but not a day. And with that, I think we are going to stop for today. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will pick it up on Daf 11 and continue our discussion about the 4 Rosh Hashanah, the 4 new years. So wishing everyone a Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom, and see all of you next week.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom. Hi. One thing.